and welcome to the Art of Being Human. Today I've decided to talk to you about your senses and how important they are in terms of your knowledge of the world and your part in the world. Now, I'm not going to talk about specific illnesses. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. I may give you some examples of things that can go wrong, but you just need to know how important your senses are and the fact that you have them. Now, there are 5 senses: seeing, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. Everything we know about our world and about the things around us is based upon what we learn from our senses. Everything that we know about life, to see it, to hear it, to taste it, to smell it, to be able to touch it. It gives us our information so that the brain can understand what's happening around us. And that's very important because the brain is acting kind of like a computer, and you feed it information from your senses, and you don't realize how much you use your senses. I put my hand on the table. I can feel the table. So what happens there? My brain knows that it's a table because I've touched it and it recognizes it. I can look at my hand on the table and say, okay, my hand is on the table. I'm patting the table with my hand. And so that tells the brain something. Now, the brain's not going to get that information if, 1, I can't see the table, or 2, I can't feel the table, and I have no response to the table. So it's important. If you lack even one of the senses, then you have a significant portion of your knowledge about the world that's taken away from you. If you're blind, or if you're deaf, or if you can't feel anything, or if you can't touch anything, or if you can't smell anything, and unfortunately, there's no way to make it up. How can you explain to a blind person what a flower really looks like? How can you explain to a person who can't smell what a flower really smells like? Because it seems to me that you would have to have some experience with the sense to be able to understand what somebody else is saying about it. If I can't see a flower, and someone says, because I'm blind, and someone says, oh, the flowers are gorgeous, well, what does a flower look like? Well, let me see, it has a center part, and it has these little things that stick out that are petals, and they're wonderful color, and you can smell them. But that doesn't tell me much. My mind may conjure up what I think it looks like, but the fact of the matter is I've never seen one, and so I can't really tell you what it really looks like. I can only conjure up in my mind what it might be like, and that might be true or not true. So I think you have to have experience in dealing with all senses before you can understand the world. There was a famous opera singer, and I'm thinking it may have been Beverly Sills, but I don't know for sure, but that's who I think it was. She was a wonderful singer, an opera singer, beautiful voice, and she really wanted to share her life with her children. But she was deeply disappointed because she had 2 children. One of them was born retarded and would never be able to understand anything that was artistic. And the other one was deaf and couldn't hear anything that she's saying. Never would be able to hear anything that she's saying. And so that was a deep disappointment. So they wouldn't be able to understand anything that she was doing that was important to her. Now, a colorblind person may talk about colors. I've been to a meeting once, and there was a man there who said, okay, our financial statement is on the pink paper, and our goals are on the yellow paper. And we just had these little booklets, and they were divided up by color, so we could see that. And he says, but it doesn't mean anything to me because I can't see color. He could see, he had vision, but he was colorblind. So he would talk about the colors like he knew what they were. He'd never seen them. And my point is, if you can't see it, you can't understand it. You may be able to describe something, but what does it mean to you? It's like talking to a person to teach them how to swim. How do you teach a person how to swim? Well, you get the book out, and you move your hands, and you kick your feet. You jump in the water. Is that going to make them swim? Probably not. because that's not going to translate immediately into swimming behavior. So your senses are critically important. And so you have to remember that without your senses, you're missing something. Now, here are some interesting things about senses that are lost. I kind of combed my information to write down the things that can go wrong. And I'm not talking about diseases, you know. Okay, there are some people who can't recognize things by feel. What I mean by that, and it's a disorder, what I mean by that, if I'm driving my car, did I remember to take something with me? I can reach over the front seat, put my hand in my purse, which is going to be beside me, and feel around and feel it and say, oh yeah, I remembered it. I don't even have to see it. I can recognize it by feel. There are some people that cannot recognize things by feel. You can have it there, and you can do experiments with them. All right, tell me what this is when you put your hand on it, but don't look. They're usually blindfolded. It's something that's very familiar to them, but they have no idea because their brain cannot recognize something unless they're looking at it. So they do not recognize anything by feel. There are people who cannot image a person or a thing when their eyes are closed. I've worked with people like this. You have them close their eyes, and they can see. They have color vision, they have normal vision, they can see just like anybody else, but unless they're seeing it, they can't conjure it up mentally. Normally, you could say to a person, close your eyes and think of a tree. Well, if I say to you, close your eyes and imagine a tree, I would say 98% of you can do it. Now, the trees that you look in your mind, that you have in your mind, aren't going to be the same as anybody else's tree, but it's definitely going to be a tree. You might image a maple, you might image an ash, you might image a drawing of a tree. Or you might image a painting of a tree, but nonetheless, it's all tree. It's not going to be alike, and we wouldn't expect it to be, but it's all tree. But these people, as soon as they close their eyes and you say, image a tree, they can't do it. All they see is black. I can't bring up that image of a tree. I can't bring up that image of a chair. I can't bring up that image of anything that you're telling me to bring up. It's just not there in my mind. Open their eyes, they can see it fine. Oh yeah, there's a tree, there's a chair. You know, it's an unusual thing. There was an architect who could visualize how she wanted her buildings to look. She had a way, you know, architects, they draw out what they're going to build, and they have it all measured out, you know, and it's very, very artistic. Some of them really look beautiful. She could see in her mind's eye everything that she wanted. She could image everything that she wanted if she were to build a building, but she couldn't draw it. She could see it in her mind, she couldn't draw it. And most architects can, they're pretty artistic, but she just couldn't. A house, oh yeah, I can see the house in my mind, and I can see the living room and the dining room, and I can see all of these things, but to draw it out, no way, couldn't do it. So she had to, as an architect, hire an artist to do her drawing for her. That's the only way it would be done, because her mind couldn't do it. There are some people that cannot feel. They have no sense of feeling, and they're in really a lot of danger because they can't feel if their hand is on a hot stove. They can't feel if anything is too uncomfortable, if they're cutting themselves. They just can't feel it. Children have to be watched with this disorder. They have to be watched carefully because they will get bumps, bruises, they will get burns, they can put scalding water on themselves. They don't feel it. It doesn't cause any pain for them, and so therefore, it doesn't bother them any, but they could get terribly, terribly injured and not be able to feel the injury, so they don't stop what they're doing. If I were to put my hand on a warm stove, I would bring it up quickly. I realize I can't keep it there, and then I'd realize that the stove was on even if I thought it was off. And I wouldn't get a bad burn because as soon as it started to get hot, it would be gone. I would lift my hand up. But people who can't feel would keep their hand on that hot stove and get burned and not know the difference. And then they see these burns, but it doesn't hurt. You know, some people think they're fortunate, but they're really not fortunate because they can't understand when they're in danger. If they're having pain because something's wrong in their body, they've got a cancer or something, they're not going to know it because they're not going to be able to feel it. And if they don't feel it, if something's wrong in their body, a terrible sore throat, pneumonia, a cancer in their stomach, they're just never going to know that there's anything wrong. So actually, they are in danger. If you can't feel, you are in danger. So it can be a dangerous situation. Let's see. Some people cannot feel hot or cold. They might be able to feel, but they can't tell if anything's being hot or anything's being cold. You know, I learned from a doctor, and this was an interesting thing I didn't know. Young children cannot distinguish a lot between what's too hot and what's too cold. If they go out on a real cold day, their bodies don't register that it's a cold day until they're a certain age. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them, they don't have any kind of a condition. The reason that they can't is because their bodies, their brains, their mind, nervous system is not developed enough to be able to do it. When this nervous system is developed enough and mature enough, when they get to be about 7 or 8, they'll step into cold water. Oh, that's cold, I got to get out. Or they'll be in the cold air. Oh, I got to get my sweater. You know, but until a certain age, the mind does not recognize it. It's just a case of physiological development. Some people have no spatial relations. They can't tell about distance. And they have a terrible time with directions and mathematics because they don't understand spatial relations. Their brain, it's a learning disability, and the brain does not register. So you can be driving and you're not quite sure of how much space there is between you and the car ahead of you. It makes drivers cautious because they don't want to get into an accident. And it makes them difficulty in terms of direction because you could say, oh, well, you go down 3 streets and turn on Route 31 and you go down there and then you see, you know, another sign that says Route 132. You take that to the left, go north, go south. That doesn't mean much to them. They just do not have it. They do not have the ability to study maps and understand maps unless a map is very familiar in an area that they're very familiar with. So spatial relations will affect the way that you do mathematics because it may be very difficult. The way that you do spatial relations and directions, it'll be very difficult. You'll have to write down directions and memorize them because it won't be natural for you. And that actually is a disability which quite a few people have. They have to memorize directions, as I said before. There are some people that cannot taste. So ice cream tastes the same as beans. And it makes it hard because they can't really enjoy food because they can't enjoy the differences in the flavor. It all tastes the same. You know, it's like, in a sense, being colorblind. I can see everything, but it's all a shade of gray. It makes life boring. So it does make it difficult for them. It makes them difficult for them to eat and eat properly because they don't enjoy the differences. Now, what are the adjustments you have to make when the senses are lacking? The senses are less precise as we grow older. You don't see quite as well. You don't hear quite as well. There are differences as you grow older. You're going to lose some of your hearing. You're going to lose some of your seeing. That's not unusual. And the hearing loss can be acute. The vision can be acute. Then your joints are going to be more painful. Your balance isn't as good. We may lose our senses gradually, or we may lose them all at once. You know, there is a medication, and I don't remember the name of it, but if you take too much of it, you can lose your hearing in a half an hour. That actually happened to a talk show host. As he was talking and doing his show, and it was a call-in show, he was able to talk and listen to people. Suddenly, his hearing started to fade. Within a half an hour, he was deaf. He couldn't hear anything at all. And it put a stop to his show for a while, and then he got a cochlear implant. And the cochlear implant does bring back hearing to a certain extent. It may not be perfect, it may not be exact, but enough so that you can hear. And people who are deaf often respond well with a cochlear implant, and they're able to hear after that. We may lose these things with drugs and with accidents. You can lose your senses or your ability to move very rapidly if you have an accident. If you have an accident and somehow you've hurt your spinal column, now you're paralyzed, but you weren't before. And so the question is, how do you adjust to this? You have to be able to adjust to the loss of your senses. If you have a loss of senses, is it easier to adjust to being blind if you're going blind gradually? Or is it easier to adjust if suddenly it's gone? I can't imagine it suddenly be gone. I had a professor who was one of my favorite professors. He was a wonderful guy. He was in the service, and he was in war, and there was something a bomb that blew up, and he was fairly close to it, and he lost his vision quite rapidly, and for the rest of his life he was blind. But he had seen before, so if it wouldn't be a question of describing what a flower looks like or anything like that. He had a memory of what he had seen before, but now we had to adjust to not having any vision. Is it easier to adjust if you haven't had vision at all? Because you know, if you don't have it, you don't miss it. If you're born blind and you don't have it, then maybe you don't miss it. But then someone has to explain to you what it means to be blind, because you're not seeing, but everybody else is, and that doesn't make any sense to you. So it's a critical area to be able to teach people that if they have a problem, that this is natural to them, but other people may not have that problem. Now, I've also heard, and it's interesting to me, that it's easier to adjust to blindness than it is to deafness. Now, I don't get it, and I don't think that way, but this is what I've heard over and over again. It's easier to adjust to blindness than it is to hearing loss. The reason is, if you have hearing loss, everybody expects you to hear well. You hear well because, or they expect you to, because you look the same. It's not obvious that you have a hearing disorder until people speak to you, and then you don't respond because you can't hear them. And then they think that you're being stubborn or they're being stuck up or something when you really just didn't hear them. Or is it easier to be able to lose something immediately or to lose it gradually? Or blindness or deafness, which is worse, which is better? I would think it would be easier to be deaf, because even if you can't hear, you need your vision. You can drive if you're deaf. You know, you can do all kinds of things. You can walk around, you know, you're not going to bump into things. But it's very, very difficult to adjust to any kind of a sense loss. So the adjustment is necessary. The adjustment needs of people who are losing their senses due to age, it's important to teach people. They may not hear as well, but your hearing tends to go gradually, so you get adjusted to it. And to you, what seems normal may not be, but if it's gradual enough, it feels normal to you. The same thing with vision loss. So it is a very difficult thing to go through a loss of hearing. Now, I was going to read you something, and I don't think I've got time to do it, but I may do it next time, just extend this class one session longer to let you realize, what does it mean if you have a sensory loss? What does it make you feel about yourself? How do you adjust to your own loss? And what does it do to your self-concept? Whether you're losing a sense gradually or whether you're losing it immediately. How do you adjust to that? How do you feel about yourself? And the other question is, how do you feel about other people who have losses? Does it put you off that somebody can't hear you, or that somebody can't hear you or see you? Does it put you off and you have difficulty in adjusting to the fact that your neighbor, your friend, your loved one no longer can see, no longer can hear? you know, or has a disability that's going to be permanent, and you're going to have to adjust to taking care of that person, especially if you're a wife and it happens to your husband, or vice versa. How do you adjust to the fact that somebody now has been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and you know they're failing? How does that affect them? How does that affect you? And I think what I'll do is I'll just extend this class for another session and go into those kinds of things. And we'll be through with the senses and pretty much through with chronic diseases. I may do some summing up, and then we'll do something else. I think we'll be doing child and individual development after that, taking people from the time that they are in the womb right up through their death in terms of their development, of developmental stages. That should be pretty interesting. But I do want to kind of end this on a note where we've covered everything we need to cover, so you can understand the chronic diseases that you yourself may have and that your loved ones may have. So we'll close it here, and please join me next time.